Hi, everyone. So we're here today to talk about Time Garden, which is a choreographic work operating at the intersection of physical and imagined virtual spaces. The piece takes place entirely in virtual three-dimensional space for VR, and it combines the art forms of dance through motion capture, music, visual art, and digital animation. And our team is made up of Scotty Hardwig, that's me, hello. I'm a dance artist and choreographer from the School of Performing Arts. We've got Charles Nichols, a composer and musician, also in the School of Performing Arts, and Zach Duer, working with the visual and animation elements of the piece from the School of Visual Arts. So in some ways, this piece began back in 2019 with a live performance work called Body Full of Time, which had a section of interactive dance performance with live motion capture that was then mapped onto a huge avatarial body and projected behind the dancer. And it was coded to respond in time-delayed and fragmented ways to my movements. And then we thought maybe we could use this same approach for a performance work that would take place entirely in virtual reality. And the seed of that idea became the premise for Time Garden. We imagined it as being a three-movement piece, each section corresponding energetically or ritually to a time of day. And so we have three distinct movements called morning, noon, and night. For each of them, we started with motion capture of my movement and then mapped that movement onto different avatars that feature different layers of human anatomy. The movements themselves also correspond to different layers of human evolution. So I'm working as a performer in certain sections with more upright ambulatory movements, but in other sections working very low to the ground in deep squats with movements that mirror the evolution of our ambulatory stride from arboreal locomotion. So when we were swinging from trees and all those steps along the evolutionary development of our contralateral stride. Night in particular goes back even further with a lot of belly down, lizard, salamander style movements. So the choreography in a way traces human movement development through time, which I think also has this fascinating intersection with the heavily 21st century set of technological components that we're working with. There's also something that's interesting to me about the replication of my body into multiple bodies. Basically, these are choreographic events with ensembles of bodies composed in virtual space, but they're all my body, they're all me as a performer. And yet at the same time, they also aren't my body. So taking movement out of context in a way. And there's something both real and hyper-real, surreal maybe, about translating choreography from corporeal body to virtual body, and just how many possibilities emerge aesthetically from that transition, that translation. As a choreographer, dancer, and generally as an artist, I'm intensely drawn to that rich territory where physical and digital bodies intersect.
I composed the music for the first movement, Morning, by mapping streams of motion capture data from Scotty's dance recordings of the position of his head, sternum, wrists, elbows, knees, and ankles to audio synthesis parameters. For instance, I mapped head Y position to overall amplitude, so the taller the dancer, the louder the sound, sternum Y position to octave, so the taller the dancer, the higher the pitch, the distance between the knees to the amount the amplitude is randomized, so the wider the knees apart, the more variation in loudness, and the distance between the ankles to the amount the pitch is randomized, so the wider the ankles are apart, the more detuned the pitch. I mapped the distance between the wrists, distance between elbows, distance between wrists and hips to parameters of granular synthesis, a technique where recorded sounds are cut into smaller samples and reassembled into jittery textures. I used the distance between wrists to vary where the sound file, the cut samples were taken, and distance between elbows to vary how large the sample to cut. I used the distance between left wrist and hip to randomize where the cut samples were taken, and the distance between right wrist and hip to randomize how large the sample was cut. I worked with 3 of Scotty's dance recordings that Zach formatted into a Unity app that streamed 3 sets of data using OSC and received the OSC data from these 3 dance recordings in max programming that scaled and mapped the data to expressively control the parameters of the granular synthesis that I programmed in the same patch. The patch applied granular synthesis to samples I recorded of student composer and a cappella singer James Gilchrist singing long tones on the vowels A, U, and E over the chromatic pitches of his extensive range, and reciting a poem that Scotty composed during one of our early project meetings in medium, low, and high voices. To make the samples of text more noisy, to contrast the sung pitches, I deleted all of the vowels in the text recordings, leaving only the consonants. I generated 2 sound files for each of the 33 dancers, who are distributed along the path of the camera in the Unity virtual environment. 1 sound file granulating a pitch and 1 a phrase of the poem. The 3 dance recordings alternated between the 33 dancers, producing variety in the animation and granular synthesis timbre as the camera moves along the path. The different pitch and text phrase sound files attached to each of the 33 dancers produces a melodic progression or harmonic motion and a variety of noisy textures as the camera moves past the dancers. Zach and I carefully mixed the levels between categories of the sound and automated the levels for each dancer to simulate the effect of the sound approaching and receding as the camera moves past the dancers. Accompanying the music generated by the dancers is music produced by the lymphatic system. 2 streams of data related to the lymphatic system controlled the timing of triggering 2 other sets of granulated sound files. For these other sound files, I recorded James singing high falsetto pitches and mouth percussion, and I granulated into jittery textures made even more dynamic by varying audio delays. As the lymphatic system accelerated, more vocal samples were triggered, and the audio delay feedback increased, producing a more sustained version of the jittery textures. Zach and I mixed the levels of lymphatic music with the dancer music and automated levels so the lymphatic system also seems to approach and recede in the spatial audio as the camera moves through the virtual environment.
So our process started somewhere between choreography, systems for processing that choreography in virtual space, and virtual environments in which the choreography would take place. We developed all 3 of those together.
One of the first technical tasks we had to deal with was putting together a pipeline to capture Scotty's movements. We had already used his internal motion inertial capture suit in body full of time, so we are familiar with that.
But in Time Garden, we wanted to integrate a new pair of motion capture gloves. Adding in finger capture goes a long way to making an avatar feel alive. Maybe we'll go even further and do facial capture for the next piece, but actually maybe not. I don't think 100% reproducing the human movement in virtual space is our goal. So facial capture might be counterproductive. Anyway, the new motion capture gloves were designed for live VR use in Unity, but didn't come with any recording capabilities or plugins for any animation recording softwares. They were just for live use. So we rigged together a system in Unity for recording the real-time movement of the fingers, while simultaneously the software for the motion capture suit was recording the movements of the rest of the body. We agreed on a gesture incorporating the fingers and the body that I could use in post-processing to synchronize the 2 recordings. And then I had a whole bunch of processing work to do that took me many, many hours for all the dozens of recordings that we did.
Once we established the pipeline, we worked in the dance studio and experimented with a variety of ideas for movements, imagining how they might be represented in virtual space.
We were at first starting we were focusing on creating a sort of hyper reality, starting with the grounded movements performed in Scotty's body, but manipulating them in virtual, impossible ways. In the end, we landed on a set of movements that didn't play so directly with hyperreality in the body, but instead the movements create a sort of sacred dialogue with an impossible set of virtual environments that are also formed out of the body. We imagined all sorts of ways of putting these movements together into virtual spaces. In the first movement, Morning, there are rows upon rows of avatars performing a ritual in a virtual null space. They move together, but not in unison. They're seemingly ignorant of each other and of the audience. And in the environment, the body's lymphatic system stretches above and around the avatars like a network of flickering digital nodes. We've gone back and forth on how digital to make this space. We originally had a gridded floor with gridded lines on the avatar's body and like a glitchy sky surrounding the space. But especially since putting everything together with the audio, a more earthy set of textures has become appropriate, using a flickering sand as the floor and a sort of clay texture for the bodies. I think bringing the avatars kind of more into our space, maybe they feel a little more real, even though they're in this sort of impossible space. The second movement, Noon, wanted to bring the body back and anatomy back into the environment. I put in 3D models of internal organs like livers and lungs and brains as surfaces for the avatars to dance on. So we ended up in the sky full of giant floating organs with reflective translucent avatars. And then in the third movement, Night, it actually started out as the first movement in my initial experiments with environments for the piece. I imagined a terrain created entirely out of a virtualized human skin with waving finger grass and rolling ribcage mountains. Scotty and I worked with Max Ofsa in the library to create 3D scans of Scotty's actual body to use for this. And the scans are quite lovely. We ended up being able to use a scan of Scotty's hand for the primary terrain and of his back for rolling hills. And working with Max was super productive. I think it took us a while to all realize together we didn't need a fully completed, stitched together, perfect model of the entire body.
Our goal was not to treat the body as an
Animatable
character, as would usually be true. I could have did that.
Instead, we just wanted high-resolution snippets of surface, which ended up being easier than we originally thought, actually. Anyway, the Night movement incorporates all this and has developed into a mammoth, endless cave that is mirrored top and bottom. You can see it here, glowing as if with bioluminescent algae and a behemoth avatar we call Mama surrounded by her babies. And we're still finishing up this movement. It's pretty close to being done now and we'll be done with the whole piece. So we've ended up creating a virtual work on an almost epic scale, it feels like now, much larger than we originally anticipated. Our process took a shift from the start where we were focusing on digitizing movement and extending it into hyperreality. And I'm quite pleased and proud with where we ended up, building sacred virtual spaces in dialogue with the digitized body.
Excellent. Thanks all. This was a great presentation from Scotty, Zach, and Charles. My name's George Hardwig. I'm the facility manager for the Creativity and Innovation District, and I'm going to take some time to get these guys to answer some questions. Again, if you have a question that you would like to submit while we're still going here, that link is right in the YouTube description. So please go ahead and send those away. Starting off, I have a question for Zach and Charles. Did you guys learn any dance moves from Scotty while you were doing this?
Still am.
I know. I don't know. That's a more complex question. I mean, it's funny, but also, I spend a lot of time sitting in a chair looking at a computer screen to do this work, and I think it's also one of the things you even just get from working together is thinking about another way of approaching how you do your work and how you live your life and things like that. And I think that's also inspiring and useful.
Thanks. The next question is a little bit more relevant to the times. How has this project had to change, and how do you see it advancing in the light of the COVID-19 pandemic? What are your plans to keep moving it forward?
Yeah, well, one thing that happened is the timeline got a little pushed back a little bit. So it's taken us longer to make it through all three movements. It's also presented an interesting problem of like how to premiere it, because we really do want to premiere it in a form that's not just video, because it is made for VR headsets. And so the question now, of course, is how do you premiere work that's designed for people to put something directly on their face and then put it down and then have somebody else put something. So we're still trying to think about ways of doing that, and whether that makes more sense in like a black box space like the Cube, or whether it would make sense more like in a museum or a gallery type of space. So there's questions about premiering it. I think, I mean, we also have talked about doing it as doing a film version of each of the different movements, but that'll take us some time to kind of set up in Unity, set up the cameras and the recordings in Unity. Because the recordings we've done so far, the one you just saw in the video, is a recording of just me wearing a headset and trying to look around really smoothly, but it has a kind of a first person camera effect that isn't always great for like a cinematic version. So that's a big question. Yeah.
But the project has been really useful during this time of self-isolation, because I can work with Scotty in his virtual form, and I have many recordings that Zach has formatted into Unity script. So I can just load that up, send that data to my Max Patch, tweak the music parameters that the dance is triggering or processing. And so in a way, I'm working with a live dancer, but virtually in this time of quarantine.
That's pretty relevant to the other ways you work. I know, Charles, you have some extensive experience in working in band across the country as well. So I'm sure it's interesting to move this into kind of a movement area as well. I think related to that, we just got a question for Scotty. Try and say this correctly. How does seeing your body / not body replicated hundreds of times with blood vessels and other anatomical features change how you dance and view your art?
Well, I mean, choreographically, in terms of dance history, it feels very different. I don't know. So there's something about it that feels like it ruptures a lot of the rules of choreographic craft, in the sense that you can have an ensemble work performed by only one person. The bodies can disconnect, disarticulate at the joints. They can fly, they can be gigantic, they can be tiny. And so there's all kinds of representational things that you can do in that kind of a space that you just can't do in the physical world. Like the digital set that we have for this piece, with these gigantic like metallic brains and veins and lymphatic organs, I mean, it would cost thousands of dollars to create an actual set like that. So there's, in a way, something that's economically democratizing about it, I feel. And a little bit going back to the other question, there's something that lends itself more to a remote style of working. I mean, it feels very odd because usually as a dancer, I'm used to like being in the room and being energetically connected with people. And what we do in the room is the piece. But what's interesting about this is that all of my movements and my bodily craft and kinesthetic awareness gets translated into this completely other space. And so it in a way gets simulated. And so what's interesting about, I'm still trying to figure out how I feel about that, actually. It's both, like you said, it's a not body. It's both physical and also not physical at the same time. It feels kind of imaginary. And so that opens out a lot of possibilities. And I'm still trying to figure out kind of what is lost in that translation, because it's really not the same as seeing a live body in performance. Yeah, I forget the first part of that question, but
I think that's a sufficient answer. Yeah. I'm sure it's very different and it's interesting. I would personally like to hear more about how it changes the choreographic craft, but
yeah. Now that you said that, one other thing is that when I'm wearing the motion capture suit and the gloves in particular, because of the way those systems track movement, it actually changes the way that I am performing with them. There's a particular kind of movement that reads really, really well. And there's kinds of movements that don't read really, really well. So if I'm moving really fast and jaggedly, it kind of causes the system to jitter. So a lot of times what I found is that actually moving in a way that's extremely slow and sequential, where there's really no momentum, actually reads super, super well. So that almost that movement quality of Tai Chi, it reads really, really well. Whereas other things where there's a lot of jumping or a lot of acrobatics, they don't work well because of the impact and the shifts in magnetism with the floor.
We have some questions about VR as a medium. You know, unfortunately today we have to experience it on a 2D screen. We can't all have a VR headset right here with us. How long is the experience for someone who's wearing a VR headset, and what level of, are they an interaction at all, or is it predominantly a viewing experience?
So there's three pieces. There's three movements to the piece: morning, noon, and night. And from the get-go, we're thinking about these as an installation where you can come and put on the headset and you'll just start to see it at whatever point it is in these like infinite loops, and wear it for however long you want and be able to hop between the three different movements. I mean, each movement is roughly like, you know, like the loop of the camera movement, if it's seen in VR, is maybe like, I don't know, 6 to 9 minutes or something like that. So you could experience the whole thing under half an hour if you wanted to. But like Scotty was saying, we've also been thinking about reimagining these as videos, because right now VR is not something that is as accessible for a lot of people, especially because of the concern about sharing headsets. And then I think we have to
we're having to make a lot of adjustments.
Yeah. And recraft everything on the video.
We're right at 9:30. I wanted to ask one question before we go that I think is really important. For students at Virginia Tech, where are there any specific classes they can take where they can start to get immersed in these experiences from Charles, Scotty, or Zach?
Scotty, do you want to take that first, Charles?
Sure. You know, I'm not teaching in studio classes this semester, but I do teach open dance and movement classes here at Virginia Tech. So those will be coming around once we get back in the studio. Yeah, you want to talk about animation, Zach?
We sometimes have, we always teach creative code and VR classes in the School of Visual Arts, and if we have room for students outside of major, then they're always invited. How about you, Charles?
I teach Music 3065, which is a Max programming class, which is the programming environment I use for this piece. And that's every fall and open to anybody.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. I know I've taken some of those classes as well when I was a student at Virginia Tech, so I can highly recommend all of these faculty. Thanks for sharing your research, and we look forward to hearing and seeing where this continues to go. Join us next week, Friday, 9 a.m.
Thank you all.